You might think you know how a story ends when 10 police cars surround a single woman, but sometimes the person standing alone is the one holding the truth. The first flashing lights appeared just after sunrise. Monica Reynolds stood on the front porch of her small brick home in Charleston, South Carolina, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold in her hands. At first she thought there had been an accident somewhere nearby. Then a second patrol car turned onto the street. Then a third. Within minutes, the quiet neighborhood looked nothing like the place she had called home for nearly 12 years. Blue lights reflected across parked cars, front windows, and freshly cut lawns. Curtains shifted. Front doors opened. Neighbors stepped outside in slippers and robes, whispering to one another as more vehicles arrived. Monica watched silently as officers parked along both sides of the street. The morning air felt unusually cool against her skin. She glanced down the block and counted again. 10 police cars. 10. Her heartbeat quickened, but her expression never changed. Years of experience had taught her that panic rarely solved anything. Across the street, a woman lifted her phone and began recording. Another neighbor joined her. Soon several people stood on their lawns watching as though they had front row seats to something dramatic. Monica hated that feeling. The feeling of being observed before anyone even knew the facts. A patrol officer stepped from his vehicle and spoke quietly into a radio. Another checked a tablet. Nobody approached the house yet. Nobody explained why they were there. They simply waited. That silence somehow felt heavier than shouting would have. Monica set her coffee mug on the porch railing and folded her arms. Her house stood exactly as it always had. The flower beds she planted every spring lined the walkway. Wind chimes hung beside the front door. A small American flag moved gently in the breeze. Nothing about the property suggested trouble. Yet trouble had clearly arrived anyway. A black SUV finally rolled onto the street and stopped near the curb. Several officers immediately straightened their posture. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in his early 50s stepped out wearing a pressed white command shirt. Chief Daniel Brooks. Monica recognized him from community meetings and local news interviews. Seeing him, there made the situation feel far more serious. Brooks surveyed the scene before turning his attention toward the porch. His eyes locked onto Monica. For several seconds, neither moved. The entire neighborhood seemed to grow quieter. Even the distant sound of traffic faded beneath the tension hanging over the street. Brooks began walking toward the house. Monica remained exactly where she was. Calm, upright, unwilling to appear intimidated. Neighbors leaned forward to listen. Phones continued recording. When Brooks finally stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, he looked up at her and spoke in a firm professional voice. Ms. Reynolds, we need to discuss the ownership status of this property. Monica blinked once. That was not what she expected to hear. Not even close. She looked from Brooks to the line of police vehicles stretching down the block, then back to him. The morning sunlight caught the edge of the porch railing as she slowly asked a question that would change everything. Chief Brooks, are you seriously telling me 10 police cars came here because of my house? Chief Brooks did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward one of the officers standing near the sidewalk and accepted a folder. The movement seemed rehearsed, as though this conversation had already taken place somewhere else before Monica ever stepped onto her porch. Around them, the neighborhood remained frozen in curiosity. Phones stayed raised. Conversations dropped to whispers. Even the birds that normally gathered near the oak trees seemed absent that morning. Brooks opened the folder and looked down briefly before returning his attention to Monica. We received information indicating there may be a legal dispute involving this property, he said. His tone remained controlled and professional. Until we clarify the situation, we need your cooperation. Monica listened carefully. The explanation made even less sense than the police presence itself. She had purchased the house 11 years earlier. Every mortgage payment had been made. Every tax bill had been paid on time. She knew exactly where every document was stored. A legal dispute, she repeated calmly. With whom? Brooks hesitated for the first time. It was a small pause, barely noticeable, but Monica caught it immediately. That information is still being reviewed. Monica folded her arms more tightly. So 10 police cars showed up because somebody made a claim that is still being reviewed? A few neighbors exchanged glances. The question sounded reasonable. Brooks ignored the reaction behind him. Ms. Reynolds, we are simply following procedure. Monica looked down the street again. Flashing lights reflected across parked vehicles. Officers stood near patrol cars. Several people were recording from their lawns. Whatever procedure this was, it felt unusually dramatic. The morning breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from somewhere nearby. Monica took a slow breath and forced herself to remain calm. Anger would only give people exactly what they expected to see. "Chief Brooks," she said, "I have lived here for more than a decade. If there is a concern, show me the concern." Brooks closed the folder. "At the moment, we are asking you to remain outside while we continue our assessment." That sentence changed everything. Monica's expression remained composed, but something hardened behind her eyes. "You want me to stay outside my own house because of an accusation you cannot explain?" More phones appeared. A teenager across the street stepped closer to hear better. Monica could almost feel the assumptions forming around her. She recognized that feeling. She had experienced versions of it before. People deciding a story before hearing facts. People choosing suspicion before evidence. Yet she refused to give them the reaction they wanted. Inside the house, the grandfather clock near the hallway chimed softly. The familiar sound grounded her. This was still her home. The same home where she hosted family dinners. The same home where she planted flowers every spring. The same home where every photograph hanging on the walls told part of her life story. Nothing had changed except the people standing outside. Brooks appeared ready to continue when another officer approached and quietly whispered something into his ear. The chief's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not alarm, not concern, confusion. Monica noticed immediately. Whatever information had just arrived was not what he expected to hear. For the first time that morning, she began to suspect there was much more happening beneath the surface than anyone on that street understood. The officer stepped back after delivering the message, but the effect lingered. Chief Brooks glanced toward the patrol car parked nearest the curb, then toward the folder in his hands. For the first time that morning, Monica saw uncertainty replacing confidence. The crowd noticed it too. Whispered conversations moved across front lawns like ripples on water. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone could tell something had changed. Monica remained standing on her porch. The wooden boards beneath her feet were warm now as the morning sun climbed higher above the neighborhood. She crossed one arm over the other and waited. Silence often revealed more than arguments ever could. Brooks finally cleared his throat. "Ms. Reynolds, we are still reviewing information related to this matter." Monica almost smiled. 20 minutes earlier, the police presence had suggested certainty. Now everything seemed less clear. "That is the third time you have said you are reviewing information," she replied calmly. "What information?" Brooks did not answer directly. Instead, he looked down at the folder again. Monica watched him carefully. Whatever had brought 10 police vehicles to her street clearly rested on paperwork that nobody seemed eager to explain. Across the road, Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down lowered her phone long enough to shake her head. She had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else. She knew Monica. Everyone did. Monica volunteered at community events. She helped organize school supply drives. Every December, she decorated her front yard with lights for local children. The idea that she was suddenly at the center of some major property dispute felt increasingly difficult to believe. Yet the police vehicles remained. Their flashing lights continued reflecting across windows and parked cars. The image alone was enough to make strangers assume the worst. Monica understood that better than anyone. A reputation could take years to build and only moments to question. As the minutes passed, more neighbors gathered. Some remained supportive. Others seemed eager for drama. A middle-aged man standing near the sidewalk quietly muttered, "There must be more to the story." Monica heard him. So did several others. Nobody challenged the comment. That was how rumors worked. They did not need evidence. They only needed space to grow. Meanwhile, inside the house, Monica's phone rested on the kitchen counter beside a bowl of fruit and a stack of unopened mail. She suddenly wished she had brought it outside. Not because she felt afraid, because she wanted access to records, mortgage statements, tax documents, purchase agreements, facts, real facts, the kind that existed long before accusations. A second officer approached Chief Brooks carrying another document. The 2 men exchanged quiet words. Monica could not hear them, but she noticed Brooks reading the page twice. Then a third time. His jaw tightened. Whatever he was looking at did not support the narrative that had brought everyone there. The realization seemed to spread slowly through the officers nearby. Some stopped looking at Monica altogether. Others appeared more interested in their tablets than the house. The confidence that had filled the street at sunrise was beginning to crack. Monica looked out over the gathering crowd and felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anger, clarity. Someone had started this. Someone had filed a complaint serious enough to trigger an extraordinary response. And somewhere in the middle of all that paperwork was a story that did not match reality. The question was no longer why the police were there. The question was who wanted them there in the first place. The answer arrived from an unexpected direction. While officers continued moving quietly between patrol cars and reviewing documents, a familiar figure appeared near the edge of the crowd. Monica recognized him immediately. It was Richard Lawson, a man who lived 3 streets away and served on the local homeowners association board. He stood partially hidden behind a group of neighbors, watching the scene with unusual interest. Monica narrowed her eyes. Something about his expression felt wrong. Not concerned, not surprised, satisfied. The realization sent a quiet chill through her. Several months earlier, Richard had approached her regarding a proposal that would have affected several homes in the neighborhood, including hers. Monica had openly disagreed during a community meeting. The discussion had remained civil, but she remembered the look on his face when the proposal failed. At the time, she thought little of it. Now she was not so sure. Across the street, whispers continued spreading. Every passing minute attracted more attention. A local news vehicle pulled onto the block and parked beside a row of spectator cars. A reporter stepped out carrying a microphone while a cameraman adjusted equipment near the sidewalk. Monica could almost hear the assumptions multiplying. People saw police cars. They saw cameras. They saw a black woman standing outside her house, surrounded by authority figures. Many would decide the story before hearing a single fact. Chief Brooks appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. He stepped away from the crowd and made a phone call. Monica watched his posture carefully. His confidence was fading. Whatever information his officers were uncovering did not appear to support the dramatic response that had brought everyone there. Several officers had stopped looking at the house entirely. Instead, they were studying documents, exchanging quiet comments, and occasionally glancing toward Brooks. One younger officer even shook his head while reviewing something on a tablet. The gesture lasted only a second, but Monica noticed. Facts were beginning to catch up with assumptions. A breeze stirred the wind chimes beside her front door. Their soft metallic sound seemed strangely calming amid the tension. Monica took a slow breath and looked across her yard. Every flower bed had been planted by her own hands. Every improvement to the house had been paid for through years of hard work. She knew exactly what she owned. She knew exactly where her records were. More importantly, she knew she had done nothing wrong. The problem was that certainty did not seem to matter to the people who arrived before asking questions. Suddenly, a raised voice broke the morning silence. Not angry, surprised. One of the officers had just received another message. Within seconds, 2 more officers gathered around him. Chief Brooks walked over immediately. The group studied a screen together. Monica could not hear the conversation, but she saw something she had been waiting for all morning. Genuine concern crossed Brooks's face. Not concern about Monica. Concern about the investigation itself. The crowd sensed it too. Conversations slowed. Phones remained raised. The energy of the entire street shifted. For the first time since the police arrived, it looked as though the people asking questions might soon become the people forced to answer them. And somewhere deep inside, Monica began to suspect that whoever started this situation never expected the truth to survive a closer look. By mid-morning, the atmosphere on the street had changed completely. The confidence that arrived with flashing lights was slowly being replaced by uncertainty. Officers who had once stood in neat groups now moved between vehicles carrying folders and tablets, comparing information that apparently refused to fit together. Monica remained on her porch, watching everything unfold with the patience of someone who understood that facts eventually had a way of finding daylight. The crowd continued growing. Neighbors who had planned ordinary Saturdays now stood in clusters across front yards discussing theories and rumors. Some believed a major crime had been uncovered. Others suspected a property dispute worth millions of dollars. The truth, whatever it was, seemed buried beneath layers of assumptions. Chief Brooks finally returned to the base of the porch steps. This time his expression looked noticeably different. Less certain, more cautious. Monica noticed immediately. "Have you found something?" she asked. Brooks hesitated. We are still verifying records. Monica nodded slowly. The same records I offered to show you an hour ago? A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Brooks did not answer. Instead, he looked toward one of the officers, who approached carrying another folder. The officer handed it over quietly. Monica could not see the documents, but she saw the chief's eyes moving rapidly across the pages. Then came another pause, another frown, another moment of confusion. Across the street, Richard Lawson no longer looked satisfied. In fact, he appeared increasingly nervous. He checked his phone repeatedly and avoided eye contact whenever someone glanced his way. Monica noticed that too. The more the investigation continued, the more his behavior seemed out of place. A local reporter finally approached the sidewalk near Monica's property line. Cameras rolled. Microphones appeared. The story was already spreading beyond the neighborhood. Yet despite all the attention, nobody had produced a single piece of evidence proving Monica had done anything wrong. The contradiction grew larger with every passing minute. A breeze carried the scent of salt from the nearby coast. Wind chimes rang softly beside the front door. Monica looked briefly toward the living room window and thought about the documents stored safely inside. Mortgage records, tax receipts, closing papers, years of proof sitting only a few feet away. The absurdity of the situation almost made her laugh. Then another officer hurried across the lawn toward Chief Brooks. Unlike the others, this officer looked genuinely surprised. He spoke quietly, but several nearby people caught fragments of the conversation. Words like county records, verified ownership, and filing discrepancy floated through the crowd. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped. Phones lowered slightly. People leaned closer. Chief Brooks listened without interrupting. When the officer finished speaking, silence hung over the street. Monica watched the chief's face carefully. Whatever information had just arrived appeared impossible to ignore. For several seconds, he simply stared at the papers in his hands. Then he slowly looked toward Richard Lawson. The movement was subtle, but Monica saw it. So did Richard. And for the first time all morning, the man who seemed most comfortable when the police arrived suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear. Monica felt a strange calm settle over her. She still did not know the entire story. She still did not know exactly who had started this. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth was finally beginning to catch up with the people who had tried to outrun it. Chief Brooks stood motionless for several seconds after hearing the latest update. Around him, officers exchanged uncertain looks while the crowd waited for someone to explain what was happening. The neighborhood that had awakened expecting a scandal now seemed trapped inside a mystery. Monica remained on her porch, calm and composed. She had stopped trying to predict what would happen next. The facts were finally surfacing, and facts did not need help from her. Across the street, Richard Lawson checked his phone again. Then again. The movement had become almost constant. His confidence was gone. In its place sat a nervous energy that grew more obvious with every passing minute. Chief Brooks slowly closed the folder in his hands and walked toward the sidewalk. Several officers followed. They gathered near a patrol vehicle where a laptop had been set up on the hood. Monica watched as documents appeared on the screen. Property records, tax filings, county registrations. Everything seemed to point in one direction. Yet whatever they were finding clearly conflicted with the complaint that had triggered the response. A reporter noticed the change immediately and moved closer. Cameras remained fixed on the scene. The story was evolving right in front of them. One officer finally approached the porch again. Unlike the others, his expression seemed almost apologetic. "Ms. Reynolds," he said politely, "can you confirm how long you have owned this property?" Monica answered without hesitation. 11 years. The officer nodded and wrote something down. "And you have maintained continuous residency during that time?" "Yes." Another note. Another nod. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it felt completely different from the atmosphere that existed earlier. The questions were no longer accusatory. They sounded like verification. Behind the officer, Chief Brooks continued reviewing information. Then his phone rang. The entire group seemed to notice at once. Brooks looked at the screen before answering. Whatever call he had received was important. His posture changed immediately. He stepped away from the crowd and listened without speaking. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Monica could not hear the conversation, but she noticed something remarkable. The chief's expression shifted from confidence to concern, then from concern to disbelief. When the call ended, he remained standing still for a moment. The morning breeze moved through the trees above him. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Nobody spoke. Finally, Brooks turned and walked directly toward Monica's porch. Every camera followed him. Every neighbor watched. He stopped at the bottom step and looked up at her. The tension felt almost physical. "Ms. Reynolds," he said carefully, "it appears there may be significant problems with the complaint that initiated this investigation." A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. Monica was not surprised. If anything, she seemed relieved. "I figured that out an hour ago," she replied. Several people nearby lowered their eyes. Brooks exhaled slowly. "There are still questions we need answered." Monica looked at him steadily. "Then maybe it is time to start asking the right people." The words hung in the air. Across the street, Richard Lawson suddenly turned and began walking away from the gathering. And for the first time all morning, more than one officer noticed him leaving. Richard Lawson had almost reached the corner when an officer called his name. The sound stopped him instantly. Several heads turned. Conversations across the neighborhood faded into silence. Richard paused with one hand still holding his phone. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Then he slowly turned around. Monica watched from her porch without saying a word. She had no interest in confrontation. She was interested in answers. Chief Brooks stepped away from the house and walked toward Richard. The distance between them was not far, but it felt significant. Reporters immediately shifted position. Cameras followed every movement. The crowd sensed that the story was changing direction. Brooks stopped several feet away and spoke calmly. Whatever he said was too quiet for the neighborhood to hear, but Richard's reaction was impossible to miss. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes widened slightly. Then he glanced toward Monica's house before quickly looking away. The exchange lasted less than a minute. Yet by the time it ended, the confidence Richard once carried had disappeared completely. Nearby officers began speaking with one another while reviewing additional records on tablets and laptops. Monica noticed that no one seemed focused on her anymore. The center of attention had shifted. For hours she had been treated as though she were the question. Now it appeared someone else might hold the answers. The realization spread through the crowd. Neighbors who had spent the morning speculating about Monica suddenly found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew. Mrs. Henderson folded her arms and shook her head. "I knew something felt wrong," she quietly told the people standing beside her. Others nodded. It was easy to believe accusations when flashing lights arrived first and facts arrived later. Across the lawn, a young officer approached the porch carrying a tablet. Unlike earlier conversations, his tone was respectful. "Ms. Reynolds, could you help us verify a few dates?" Monica agreed immediately. The questions centered around property transfers, county filings, and homeowner records. Every answer she provided matched information already appearing in official databases. The officer thanked her and returned to the command vehicle. Monica noticed something important. Nobody was questioning whether she owned the house anymore. They were trying to understand how such a large response had been triggered in the first place. The distinction mattered. Clouds drifted slowly across the blue sky overhead. The flashing lights still reflected across windows, but their presence now felt almost awkward, as though the scene itself no longer matched reality. Then another vehicle arrived. It was not a police car. It was a dark government sedan with federal license plates. The arrival immediately drew attention. Several officers exchanged looks. Chief Brooks walked toward it the moment it stopped. A man in a gray suit stepped out carrying a thin leather portfolio. His expression was serious but controlled. He spoke briefly with Brooks before both men looked toward Monica's house. Whatever was inside that portfolio appeared important. Very important. Monica felt her pulse quicken for the first time all morning. Not from fear. From curiosity. Somewhere beneath the paperwork, the complaints, and the confusion, there was a truth powerful enough to bring 10 police cars to her street. And judging by the way everyone was reacting now, that truth was about to come into the open. The man with the leather portfolio did not rush. That was the first thing Monica noticed. While everyone else on the street seemed caught between curiosity and anxiety, he moved with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the answers. Chief Brooks walked beside him toward the porch. Reporters adjusted cameras. Neighbors stepped closer. Even the officers appeared unusually attentive. The entire street seemed to lean forward at once. Monica remained where she was. standing beside the porch railing beneath the soft sound of the wind chimes. The morning sun now sat high above the neighborhood, casting long reflections across patrol car windows. When the two men reached the foot of the steps, the visitor introduced himself. "My name is Thomas Grant." His voice was steady and professional. "I work with a federal property oversight office." Monica nodded politely. "Can I help you with something?" A faint smile appeared on his face. "Actually, Ms. Reynolds, I believe we are here to help you." The sentence immediately changed the atmosphere. Several reporters exchanged surprised looks. Chief Brooks folded his arms and remained silent. It was obvious he wanted Thomas to speak. The man opened the portfolio and removed several documents. Thick papers, official seals, multiple signatures. Nothing about them looked rushed or uncertain. Thomas reviewed the first page before looking up. "The complaint filed against your property triggered a series of automatic reviews," he explained. "Normally, those reviews remain administrative. In this case, however, several unusual claims were attached to the filing." Monica listened carefully. So did everyone else. Thomas continued. "Those claims suggested ownership discrepancies, unauthorized transfers, and questions regarding residency." Monica almost laughed. Every one of those claims was absurd. "And none of them were true?" she asked. Thomas shook his head. "Not a single one." The crowd erupted into whispers. Some people looked embarrassed. Others looked angry. Several neighbors who had spent the morning speculating suddenly seemed very interested in staring at the ground. Chief Brooks closed his eyes briefly. Monica could almost see the frustration building behind his professional expression. Thomas turned another page. "In fact, our review confirmed that your ownership records are among the most complete we have seen." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Among the most complete?" Thomas nodded. "Every tax payment documented. Every transfer properly recorded. Every filing verified." For the first time all day, a few officers actually smiled. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood since sunrise was beginning to crack. Yet Thomas was not finished. He removed one final document from the portfolio. This one seemed different. More important. Even Chief Brooks straightened slightly when he saw it. Thomas studied the page before speaking again. "There is one additional detail." The street became quiet once more. Monica felt her pulse quicken. "What detail?" Thomas looked directly at her. "The complaint that started all of this appears to have been connected to someone who believed you would not have the resources or connections necessary to challenge it." The words landed heavily. Across the street, Richard Lawson lowered his eyes. Monica noticed immediately. So did several officers. And in that moment, standing beneath the bright Carolina sky, Monica realized this story had never been about property records at all. It had been about assumptions. The problem for the people who made those assumptions was that they were about to discover just how wrong they had been. Monica did not respond immediately. She looked out across the street, past the patrol cars, past the cameras, and past the gathering crowd. The neighborhood she had known for more than a decade suddenly felt different. Not because of what had happened that morning, but because so many people had been willing to believe the worst before knowing the truth. The realization was disappointing, yet strangely clarifying. Thomas Grant carefully returned the document to his portfolio, while Chief Brooks stood beside him in thoughtful silence. The chief was no longer directing an investigation. He was trying to understand how it had gone so wrong. Across the lawn, reporters quietly exchanged notes. The story they expected to tell had vanished. A different story was emerging now, one about assumptions, paperwork, and the danger of acting before verifying facts. Richard Lawson remained near the edge of the crowd. He no longer looked toward Monica's house. Instead, he stared at the sidewalk as though searching for a way to disappear into it. Several neighbors had begun watching him instead of her. That change alone spoke volumes. Monica finally broke the silence. "So someone believed I would not fight back?" Thomas nodded. "That appears to be part of it." Monica considered the answer. Then she gave a small smile. Not an angry smile. Not a victorious one. Simply the smile of someone who had spent years overcoming obstacles others never expected her to overcome. "That was their first mistake," she said. A few people nearby lowered their eyes. The statement was calm, yet powerful. Chief Brooks exhaled slowly. "Ms. Reynolds, there is another matter." Monica looked at him. The chief hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The call I received earlier came from a federal review office. They identified something unusual connected to your property records." Monica raised an eyebrow. Unusual how? Before Brooks could answer, Thomas stepped forward. Your name appeared during a secondary review connected to a federal housing initiative several years ago. Monica frowned slightly. She remembered the program. She had volunteered countless hours helping military families navigate housing assistance after a devastating coastal storm damaged dozens of homes. It had been years ago. She had almost forgotten about it. Thomas opened the portfolio once more and removed a single page. Your assistance during that project was formally documented. Monica blinked. That was a long time ago. Yes, Thomas replied. But apparently not everyone forgot. The word seemed oddly specific. Monica noticed it immediately. So did Chief Brooks. Thomas checked his watch, then glanced toward the far end of the street. The gesture was subtle, but intentional. Monica followed his gaze. Nothing appeared unusual at first. Just another quiet residential block stretching toward the intersection. Then she noticed several officers looking in the same direction. One of them spoke into a radio. Another straightened his posture. The mood shifted again. Not dramatically, just enough to feel it. Thomas closed the portfolio. I believe, he said calmly, that someone may be arriving shortly who can provide additional context. Monica studied him carefully. Who? Thomas smiled faintly. Someone who remembers exactly what you did when everyone else had forgotten. And as those words settled across the neighborhood, the distant sound of approaching engines began echoing from somewhere beyond the corner. The distant engines grew louder with each passing second. One by one, heads turned toward the far end of the street. Conversations faded. Reporters lifted cameras. Officers adjusted their posture. Even Chief Brooks seemed uncertain about what was coming next. Monica stood quietly on her porch, watching the intersection at the end of the block. The morning sunlight reflected off windows and polished vehicle surfaces as a small convoy slowly appeared around the corner. There was nothing dramatic about the vehicles themselves. They were clean, professional, and unmarked. Yet the reaction they created was immediate. Several federal officials standing near Thomas Grant exchanged knowing looks. The convoy rolled forward and came to a smooth stop along the curb. Doors opened. Men and women stepped out wearing business attire and government credentials. Then one final vehicle arrived. The crowd seemed to sense its importance before anyone emerged. Silence settled across the neighborhood. The door opened, and a tall man in his early 40s stepped onto the pavement. His posture was calm. His expression was focused. There was no need for introductions among many of the people present. Several officers recognized him instantly. Others appeared to recognize only the significance of his arrival. Thomas Grant smiled faintly. Right on time, he said. The man approached with steady confidence until he reached the edge of Monica's front lawn. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Then his serious expression softened into genuine respect. Monica stared back, searching her memory. Something about him felt familiar. Not recent. Older. Buried beneath years of life and responsibilities. The man finally spoke. Ms. Reynolds. His voice carried easily across the quiet street. I was hoping we would meet again under better circumstances. Monica frowned slightly. Then recognition flashed across her face. The coastal storm. The emergency housing center. Families sleeping in school gyms. Volunteers working through exhaustion. Suddenly she remembered. Years earlier, she had spent months helping displaced military families navigate housing assistance after one of the worst storms the region had seen. The man standing before her had been one of those families. Ethan, she asked softly. A smile appeared. Commander Ethan Walker. Several people in the crowd reacted immediately. The name carried weight. Not because he demanded attention, but because of the reputation attached to years of distinguished military service. Ethan nodded respectfully toward Monica. You probably do not remember everything you did back then. Monica almost laughed. It was a long time ago. Not for the families you helped. Ethan replied. The neighborhood listened in complete silence. Ethan turned toward Chief Brooks and Thomas Grant. When federal reviewers saw her name attached to this complaint, several people reached out to me. He looked back at Monica. They remembered how many lives she helped stabilize during that crisis. Monica felt unexpectedly emotional. She had never volunteered for recognition. Most of the people she assisted had disappeared back into their own lives years ago. She assumed they had forgotten her. Apparently, she had been wrong. Ethan continued. Some debts cannot be repaid, but gratitude should never be forgotten. Across the street, Richard Lawson lowered his head. Around him, Neighbors began seeing Monica through an entirely different lens. Not as the subject of an accusation, not as the center of a controversy, but as someone whose quiet acts of service had left a lasting mark long after everyone assumed the story was over. For several moments after Ethan Walker finished speaking, nobody on the street seemed to know what to say. The morning that had begun with flashing lights and suspicion now stood balanced on an entirely different truth. Monica looked at Ethan with quiet disbelief. She remembered the storm. She remembered exhausted families waiting for answers. She remembered children sleeping on folding cots inside crowded shelters. What she did not remember was keeping track of names. To her, helping people had never been a transaction. It had simply been the right thing to do. Ethan seemed to understand exactly what she was thinking. "You never asked who we were," he said. "You never asked what you would get in return. You just helped." The words carried across the neighborhood. Cameras recorded every second. Several reporters lowered their microphones, listening rather than interviewing. Some stories were bigger than headlines. Chief Brooks stood quietly beside Thomas Grant. The chief looked toward Monica's house, then toward the line of patrol vehicles stretching down the block. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Hours earlier, those vehicles represented authority. Now they looked like evidence of how quickly assumptions could become actions. Thomas opened his portfolio once more and handed a document to Brooks. The chief reviewed it carefully. Then he read it again. Around him, officers waited. Finally, he nodded. "The complaint has been fully reviewed," he said. His voice carried clearly through the crowd. Conversation stopped immediately. There is no legal basis supporting any challenge to Ms. Reynolds' ownership of this property. A wave of murmurs spread across the street. Several neighbors exchanged embarrassed glances. Others looked directly at Richard Lawson. The man who had spent most of the morning avoiding attention now found himself unable to escape it. Brooks continued. "County records, federal reviews, and independent verification all confirm the same conclusion. Ms. Reynolds is the lawful owner of this home. She has been throughout this entire process." Monica closed her eyes briefly. Not because she doubted the outcome, because hearing the truth spoken publicly mattered more than she expected. Across the crowd, Mrs. Henderson began clapping softly. Another neighbor joined her. Then another. Within seconds, applause spread across the block. It was not loud or celebratory. It felt more like acknowledgement. Recognition. A community slowly realizing it had watched the wrong person all morning. Monica looked down at the porch floor. The sunlight illuminated the flower beds she had planted herself. The wind chimes stirred gently beside the front door. Everything looked exactly as it had at sunrise. Yet somehow everything felt different. Ethan stepped closer to the porch. "There is one more thing," he said. Monica raised an eyebrow. Ethan smiled. "When I received the call about your situation this morning, I made a few calls of my own." The statement immediately caught everyone's attention. Even Chief Brooks looked curious. Ethan glanced toward the far end of the street where several additional vehicles had just appeared in the distance. They were still too far away to identify clearly, but their arrival seemed deliberate. Ethan's expression remained calm. "A lot of people wanted the chance to thank you properly." Monica followed his gaze. The approaching vehicles grew larger as they moved toward the neighborhood. And as the crowd began noticing them too, a new wave of curiosity spread across Maple Street. The vehicles rolled slowly onto Maple Street, drawing every eye in the neighborhood. By now the flashing police lights seemed almost forgotten. People moved closer to the sidewalks. Reporters repositioned cameras. Even the officers appeared curious. Monica stood quietly on her porch as the convoy came to a stop. One by one, men and women stepped out. Some wore military uniforms. Others wore civilian clothing. A few carried small folders. Several held framed photographs. None of them looked angry. None looked interested in controversy. They looked grateful. Ethan Walker smiled as he watched Monica's expression change from confusion to disbelief. "You helped more people than you realize," he said. The first visitor approached the porch. He was an older man with silver hair and a slight limp. He paused at the bottom step and looked up at Monica. "My family lost everything after the storm," he said. "You found us temporary housing when nobody else could." Monica searched her memory. The years had blurred many faces together. The man seemed to understand. "You probably do not remember me." Monica smiled softly. "I remember a lot of families." The man laughed. "That sounds exactly like something you would say." He handed her a framed photograph showing a rebuilt home standing beneath a bright blue sky. Because of your help, my grandchildren grew up here. Another person stepped forward. Then another. Each carried a story. A military spouse spoke about emergency assistance Monica helped arrange. A retired service member described how her guidance connected his family with resources they desperately needed. A young woman explained that Monica's encouragement during a difficult period inspired her to pursue a career helping disaster victims herself. Story after story unfolded beneath the Carolina sun. Neighbors listened in stunned silence. The woman many had spent the morning questioning was now being thanked by people who had traveled hundreds of miles simply to express their gratitude. Across the street, Richard Lawson stood completely alone. Nobody paid attention to him anymore. The spotlight he seemed so eager to place on Monica had shifted entirely. Chief Brooks watched quietly. The expression on his face had changed from authority to reflection. He understood now that the situation was never about ownership records. It was about assumptions. Assumptions that had spread faster than facts. Ethan eventually stepped beside Monica on the porch. "There is something else you should know," he said. Monica looked at him. "What is that?" Ethan glanced toward the crowd gathered on her lawn. "When word spread this morning, people did not come because of my phone call." Monica frowned slightly. Ethan smiled. "They came because your name meant something to them." The statement hit harder than she expected. For years, she had quietly helped wherever she could. She never kept score. She never expected recognition. Yet standing there surrounded by people whose lives had intersected with hers, she realized kindness had a way of traveling farther than anyone could see. The applause that followed was not loud or dramatic. It was genuine. And as Monica looked across the faces filling her front yard, she understood that the longest-lasting influence in a person's life is often the good they do when nobody is watching. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, the neighborhood finally started to breathe again. One by one, patrol cars quietly departed. The flashing lights disappeared. Reporters packed their equipment. Conversations softened into ordinary voices. Maple Street gradually returned to the peaceful place it had been before sunrise. Yet nobody standing there would forget what they had witnessed. Monica remained on her porch long after most of the crowd had dispersed. The framed photographs and handwritten notes people had given her rested beside the front door. Each carried a story she never expected to hear again. Each represented a life that had continued moving forward long after their paths crossed. Ethan Walker stood nearby, looking out across the street. The tension that had dominated the day was gone now. In its place sat something quieter, something more meaningful. Chief Brooks approached the porch one final time. There were no cameras surrounding him now, no officers waiting behind him, just a man carrying the weight of a difficult lesson. He removed his cap and looked directly at Monica. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, "I owe you an apology." Monica listened without interrupting. Brooks took a slow breath. "We should have verified more before allowing assumptions to shape our response. What happened here today should not have happened this way." Monica studied him for a moment. The apology sounded sincere. More importantly, it sounded honest. She could see the difference. "Thank you," she said quietly. Brooks nodded. For a second, it looked as though he wanted to say more. Instead, he simply offered a final respectful glance and walked back toward his vehicle. Across the street, several neighbors who had spent the morning watching from a distance now approached the porch. Some apologized. Others simply thanked Monica for her patience. She accepted each conversation with the same calm dignity she had shown throughout the day. Not once did she embarrass anyone. Not once did she seek revenge. She understood something many people never learned. Humiliating someone rarely changed them. Understanding sometimes did. As the crowd slowly disappeared, Ethan picked up one of the framed photographs resting near the door. "You know," he said, smiling, "most people would have spent the whole day reminding everyone they were right." Monica laughed softly. "That sounds exhausting." Ethan laughed too. The wind chimes stirred above them. Somewhere nearby, children rode bicycles down the sidewalk. A lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically in a neighboring yard. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. The kind of sounds that felt precious after an extraordinary day. Eventually, Ethan prepared to leave. Before walking away, he paused near the bottom of the porch steps. "A lot of people respect you, Monica." She smiled. "I hope they remember to help someone else when they get the chance." Ethan nodded. "That is exactly why they respect you." As evening settled over the neighborhood, Monica stood alone on her porch once more. The street was quiet now. Golden sunlight stretched across the lawns and reflected softly against the windows of her home. The same home she had owned all along. The same home she had protected not with power, influence, or anger, but with truth. She looked out at the peaceful neighborhood and smiled. The day had begun with suspicion. It ended with understanding. And somewhere between those two moments, people remembered something important. The strongest person in the story had never been the one surrounded by authority. It was the woman who never stopped choosing grace when she finally had every reason not to.